Let's bring in CNBC's senior Washington correspondent, Eamon Javers, and David Fahrenthold, investigative reporter for the New York Times. Okay, Eamon, you interviewed Vivek Ramaswamy just yesterday for CNBC at the CFO Summit. I want to play a little bit of what he told you.
A lot of the political philosophical musing about whether or not we should be cutting entitlements or not, or whether or not the president can impound funds, it's a deflection from the fact that there's a lot lower hanging fruit in terms of waste, fraud, abuse, error, program integrity failures that you got to go after first before we ever need to get to those harder political questions.
I'm so curious, what was your sense? Because I think you talked to him for like half an hour or something. Big picture of what the real goals of DOGE are.
You know, it's a total transformation and reinvention of the federal government in a much smaller size, delivering much fewer services to much fewer people. I mean, that's sort of what he has in mind. He's talking about a total transformation of the way Washington, D.C. does business, and he wants to do it with a lot less employees in the federal government. You know, the question is whether he can achieve any of that. These goals are insanely ambitious by inside the Beltway standards, right? And they're going to run into opposition from members of Congress up on Capitol Hill. As you say, you know, this panel that he's on is sort of an invented outside of government panel. All they can do is make recommendations. And the power of the purse under the Constitution is with Congress. And there are Republican members of the appropriations committees who are people who are, you know, entitled by the Constitution to actually set federal spending priorities, who will not like to have Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy telling them what to do, right? So they're going to run into some institutional problems right off the bat. And I think that's what today on Capitol Hill is designed to sort of head off to the extent that they can.
Yeah, it is really interesting, David. Rosa DeLauro, I think, spoke for a lot of folks, especially on the Democratic side. She said that the DOGE folks have zero authority. It's a gang of two. It's Congress that makes these determinations. But we also know if they have the ear of Donald Trump, their influence could be significant. So my question is, having two billionaires with influence over policy proposals that it could impact their own bottom lines, their company's bottom lines, obviously brings potential conflict of interest questions. And I know you've spent a lot of time looking into the way the incoming Trump team is treating disclosure and ethics requirements. But I mean, if Musk and Ramaswamy aren't even government employees, are there any ethical guardrails?
It doesn't seem like there are. And in fact, you know, one of the few sort of details we've gotten about what these folks want to do is from Musk. And when he talks about the kind of regulations he wants to cut, he talks about regulations that directly affect his own businesses, regulations that slow down his launches from SpaceX down in South Texas, regulations that stop the Boring Company from building a tunnel it wants to build, regulations that stop what Tesla's trying to do with self-driving cars. He feels like when he talks about what's the government doing wrong, it's slowing him down. So, yes, he doesn't seem like he's recusing himself from those situations. In fact, they seem like the center of what he's trying to do.
So, Eamon, on Morning Joe this morning, our friend, former Treasury official Steve Ratner, added up some of Musk and Ramaswamy's proposed cuts, things they've talked about, including elimination of entire programs, VA, healthcare, the NIH, FBI, SEC. But even cuts that drastic in many people's minds would only amount to $221 billion. Do they really think, or at least talking to Ramaswamy, does he really think that $2 trillion worth of cuts is realistic?
You know, he didn't commit to a lot when I talked to him yesterday. He didn't commit to the $2 trillion figure. I asked him for, you know, one example of one large thing north of $10 billion that he'd like to cut. He wouldn't commit to any example there. I asked him, you know, what guidance has Donald Trump given him about what Trump wants to cut from the federal budget. He wouldn't put a specific on that either. You know, and I asked him about these conflicts of interest with Elon Musk in terms of Elon Musk either getting federal contracts and deciding which contracts are then wasteful or not. Maybe his competitors are wasteful and his are not. He didn't want to really address that directly, and he didn't want to address the question of whether Elon Musk has a conflict of interest in terms of China. Elon does an enormous amount of business in China. He's very critical of, you know, freedom of speech issues here in the United States, but not so much in China. Hasn't said a whole lot about freedom of speech in China, right? And so the question is, if he's going to be serving in an administration that is as anti-China as the Trump administration says it wants to be, you know, are there conflicts of interest there? Ramaswamy kind of talked around that one as well. So they're clearly not at a point now where they're willing to put any detail on this at all. And maybe that's behind closed doors what they're going to start to do up on Capitol Hill today. It's a very, very tall order.
Yeah, and we're waiting to hear from them. Obviously, the podium is there. We're waiting for them to show up. But, David, Musk and Ramaswamy have also been talking about a topic that could have broad popular support, getting rid of daylight savings time. Musk actually wrote, "Looks like the people want to abolish the annoying time changes." Ramaswamy responded, "It's inefficient and easy to change." I mean, I don't even know that's part of their purview. Nevertheless, is it your sense that while the budget may be the central focus of DOGE, the sky's the limit on potential influence?
Well, we're in a great period for them because they don't have any power yet. Trump's not in office. There's nobody out there checking their power or telling them no. So this is the time to sort of spitball and the sky's the limit. Everything seems so easy. So, but I do think it's a little worrisome for them now that instead of focusing on, okay, we're going to cut waste out of Medicare through this step and this step and this step, we're going to go after the Pentagon and make sure its budget is audited this way. Instead of diving into the details that would actually lead them to their goal, they're sort of going off on other tangents that, while maybe popular, don't really have anything to do with government efficiency. What I want to see from them is, are they serious? Are they serious enough to really dive into the weeds of these big federal bureaucracies and find the waste, fraud, and abuse? Or do they just want to tweet about it? And so far, it seems like they just want to tweet about it.